This session and a lot of what I'm planning to share about over the next several weeks is really focused on the higher education, the college and university setting, and teaching, instruction, and assessment in the midst of continued or ongoing constraints and challenges. What's interesting as we're now rounding the corner into the spring semesters, that last year the changes that we had to make were midterm and certainly quite sudden, and with totally not knowing anything that might happen. So very much a day-to-day kind of crisis response in the way that we were adjusting how we were teaching, what we were teaching, and so on. Now, a bunch of months later, and with things maybe not any less challenging, but certainly less unfamiliar, it presents an opportunity to really think about how to better approach the learning objectives that we've set forth for our students, while better recognizing the challenges and constraints that may still be persistent in this coming term. Just a little bit about me. I do a bunch of things. So primarily, I'm actually an administrator at a pre-K through 9 school in Connecticut called New Canaan Country School. I'm the director of studies there. But I also teach at Columbia University. I teach at the School of Professional Studies. I'm a lecturer there. And then I teach at Teachers College in the Math, Science, and Technology department. And then I also teach as part of the Klingenstein Center in private school leadership in one of the master's programs there. Oh, I'm also one of the founders of a software that I'm using right now called Explain Everything, whose Zoom system I'm currently using to host this conversation. I've been spending a lot of my, I guess, career and time looking at the intersection of education technology, of organizational leadership, and then certainly teaching, learning, and especially assessment. All of this effort in having this webinar and some of the sharing that's been on my mind is very much just trying to put as much out there, because I think the more that people are sharing what they're experiencing without necessarily claiming that it's the right answer or response, but just so people can learn by the things that folks are trying and finding successes or maybe not so much, I think that's a good thing. I would say from like February, March, I think a lot of my attention was focused on the K-12 context. But I also recognize that in higher education, there's different layers of challenges, and I think also some different layers of urgency around better understanding how to effectively facilitate existing programs, adapt programs, and of course start thinking about new programs given all of the unknowns that are around us all. So that's kind of the intent. Let me tell you about what my course that I'm going to be kind of grounding most of my thoughts both today and down the road in. So one of my spring semester courses is this MSTU 4029, which is, there's kind of a meta layer here because it's about education technology. It's for early career or some mid-career educators to become better versed around issues in technology and schools. And this is just kind of a snapshot from the syllabus to get a sense of the primary goals of this experience. It's a very, typically it's a face-to-face in-person class, 23 to 25 students, meets every week, from 5:10 to 6:50 p.m. in a classroom at Columbia's at Teachers College campus, with 1 week off for spring break. So there's a lot of kind of normal ritual and routine to the way that this course has been structured. And to just get a sense of what we've done, Don and I, my co-instructor, for an in-person setting, there are things that we like to do. So certainly we like to have our students working with each other. We do some direct instruction and mini lessons and things like that, but we really try to make use of the time that we're all together. We love to bring in guest speakers to share their expertise with the class. We like to make use of all of the spaces that are available to us. We like to go on trips. We're lucky to be in New York City, but I would say everywhere has interesting places to visit. So we like to go what we call journeys or voyages to different spaces, whether it's school settings or other places where we think our students can get ideas and inspirations at this intersection of technology, schools, and leadership. So as you can imagine, for a dynamic in-person like this to first be immediately transformed into an online setting, or for this coming semester, knowing that we've had some time to think about and plan for online. We recognize we cannot replicate all of these things that are even pictured here in an online setting, but that doesn't mean we still can't effectively help students work towards these objectives that I had shared. Just for a sense of a timeline, in around Thanksgiving, we were informed of, we had to make a decision around November about what would our format of our class be. We knew that it was going to be online no matter what. The question was, is it going to be like online all synchronous, meaning we're probably just going to meet every Tuesday from 5:10 to 6:50, but over Zoom instead of in person? Asynchronous, meaning will we do something that's entirely online and self-paced for the student? You could still do group work in asynchronous and self-paced. Or in this case, the definition of hybrid would be a mix of the two. And wanting to have as much optionality, Don and I chose this hybrid, even though we still hadn't fully fleshed out exactly what our week-to-week adjustments might be. We wanted to be respectful of the fact that I think on December 7th was the first day for continuing students to register and enroll, and I think the 14th was for new students. Something else from a timeline perspective that we're managing is that the semester's starting earlier than in years past. Our understanding is that the university is going to have a longer summer term. So instead of us, where we normally used to start very end of January and go into mid-May, we're starting earlier in January and ending, I think the last day that the spring term is in April. So that also creates some challenges just from a planning perspective. So amongst all of this, and whether you work in higher education or in other settings, or not even in non-education settings, I think a lot of what this pandemic has done is generated a huge sense of a loss of control, or a reality in many ways of a loss of control. And while not directly in the moment now responding to emergency crisis, we're still responding to a crisis, but some of the constraints are a little bit more known, or certainly are more known than they were in the fall or last spring. So a good exercise to do might be to first start identifying and just naming what are those things that there's less control over. And I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the elements that we've been experiencing. So first, the deadline, right, to make that decision, to decide what that format is, that is something that an external body, the university, needed to know. And that creates a sense of not anxiety, but again, urgency. But then at the same time, we know from having more control, we still get to be certain about what it is we want our students to experience and to learn. And we can reaffirm that commitment. And in many ways, let me see if I can find this picture again here. No matter what the format or modalities or timing or any of those things are, we could still stay true to the way that we've been designing and iterating upon these three objectives, that we can still design for them, knowing that the experience will not be at all the same as what students who may have experienced a 14 or 15 week in-person version of this class would be. So another thing for less control, let me see. Here's a good one. All right, so the location or the time zones of the students. So normally when we're running the class in person, we know some things. We know the students are going to be located in New York. They're going to be on the same time zone. We generally know, some are part-time, some are full-time, but generally having that being a known thing makes certain planning choices a little bit easier. That's more difficult if we anticipate students are going to be accessing this course from a variety of locations, a variety of time zones. Now, Don and I are still both in Eastern time, so we have to plan around our other commitments and in many ways conveniences, right? It doesn't make sense. We're not going to wake up at 2:30 in the morning, even though that might be a better time for folks in Australia. But it's something to consider. But what we then can do, actually, knowing that, is decide upon, actually, look at this. How do we want students to use their time? So even though they're in different locations and time zones, something that we have control over in this planning is how much do we want students to engage with us and each other synchronously versus asynchronously. Typically, our normal course, we prioritize around those 2 hours or the hour and 40 minutes of synchronous time, and then the in-between work as kind of our weekly cadence. But now we can start to make some different choices based on the fact that everybody's going to be engaging across distance, and we might be able to better serve some of those students who are accessing our program from different time zones. Oops, the number of enrolled students, that's something that's not necessarily in our control. We didn't change it, so there's still going to be 23 to 25 students, depending on how many students we might additionally let in. And something that we do have control over within this is to think about what types of activities and engagement do we want students to do individually versus things that we might want them to do in groups, pairs, or small groups. And it's not yet fully defined what it's going to be, but it's something that's within our control to decide from an instructional design perspective. We don't have any control over when the term ends and starts, but we do have some control over how we're going to pace what we're doing within those boundaries. So while we might have had a flow that was optimized for meeting every week with kind of homework and readings in between, if we're going to change around the synchronous and asynchronous use of time, if we're going to rethink how we're using individual and group time, well, now we can start to have some different choices around pacing. Seat hours per student per semester. I actually don't know fully what it is. I know what it is at SPS, but I imagine it's somewhere in that 14 to, somewhere in that like 20 to 24 hours of quote seat time, plus another probably 15 to 30 hours of homework and independent time. So that makes up a typical 3-credit course at the graduate, master's, or doctoral level. So we still have to kind of honor and adhere to that from a programmatic kind of excellence and consistency perspective. But we can also think about within meeting that kind of seat hour criteria, what are the different modes of instruction that could meet that? Does it mean that we have to have a live Zoom, or is a student watching, say, a 20 or 30-minute recorded mini lesson on a topic we otherwise would have just kind of done as a presentation during class? Cannot that count towards that same seat hour commitment? We're interpreting that as yes. But again, it creates more choice given these new defaults. And then finally, let me see if I can grab this one here. The tech platforms. There's certain ones that the university has done a good job. Oh, my camera just died for a sec. There, I'm back. Has done a great job of standardizing since I started at TC almost 7 or 8 years ago. So like the LMS we use as Canvas, and the email and like doc system is all G Suite. And like, that's great knowing that year after year that we can rely on those threads being consistent. Certainly since the pandemic started, Zoom has also been kind of a standardized platform. So coming into it, I don't see those as kind of restrictions or a sense of less control. I actually find that they create a sense of comfort, but at the same time, it forces us as instructors to think about, other tools that we might want to use with our students. How can they be used as extensions from those standardized platforms, as opposed to kind of quote going rogue and using something totally off the beaten path, because that's not necessarily fair to the students, right? If they're managing 3 or 4 or 5 different courses and the baseline systems are different for each course, that would be hard in an in-person setting, and I would say impossible for a student to navigate across distance. So we don't feel restricted at all in our ability to kind of layer on other tools and platforms, but we also know it's very important to be committed to that baseline because it eliminates so much confusion from information flow. from an information flow perspective. Let me give a few more snapshots of the syllabus here so you can get a sense of um, some things here. So one of the things that we did from the technology perspective is for our students, we actually haven't published the course yet. I'm going to do that on New Year's Day. Really think about our kind of stack of tools that we'll be using regularly as part of our course. So like I pointed out before, Canvas is our LMS. We're going to use Zoom for moments like these where we're all together, and in some cases recorded for those who may not be able to attend live. Our TC email is the G Suite, so that's really Gmail within our school domain, and that's great. For the last couple of years, we've been using Slack as kind of a ongoing back channel space for different kinds of conversation. It's been more experimental than necessarily full blown, I would say, right? Because if students are not using Slack in every other class, it just becomes kind of this other tangential destination to go to, and doesn't always line up. But we also believe it's good for our students to experience communicating in a space like that. So that's why we're continuing to use it. We're just using a free version for now, and just for kind of light communication. Another tool we're going to be using for the first time with some structures, Mural, which is another kind of collaborative space that we do a lot of kind of design work, design thinking-esque project work. And we're going to try using Mural as kind of a more structured, collaborative, ongoing space. And then, I mean, we're going to use Explain Everything. I'm going to certainly use it for my own instruction, but we also want to encourage our students to be able to use it as like a reflective space for their work, and that's the stack. The other thing I want to show here before we kind of turn the page is how we ended up designing our week-to-week syllabus. And what I want to point out here is a couple of those choices. So, for example, we're very intentionally going to have our first 2 weeks kind of fall under that Tuesday routine, synchronous. A lot of it, we're trying to build rapport and just get everybody on board to all of the things that we're doing. And it's important for everybody to see and hear each other, and certainly for our students to hear from us. But then what we're going to do is have the next 3 weeks be mostly asynchronous, and for the most part asynchronous and independent work. So we'll have this kind of very intentional kickoff, and then a couple of weeks, which is going to be much more academic reading, a little bit deeper reflection, deeper just getting familiar with some of the topics and ideas in and around ed tech. That's again for this course. And then we're going to come back together in these weeks here. So one of the things that we're going to try to do, we haven't confirmed how the timing is going to work yet, is to try to meet actually 4 times in person within 2 weeks. The idea is that we've always done kind of a rapid design, rapid iteration project, but it's always gets interrupted by the week on, then a week in between, and it's hard to build and preserve momentum. So what we're trying to do is like trade off and like actually build in multiple synchronous meetings within these 2 weeks. And then we're followed by spring break, and then a couple more less structured meeting times to follow that. I don't think we would try this in a typical in-person setting, because the way that scheduling and other challenges happen, it feels less possible to do. But we're going to try that as a different use of time and pacing. Another thing which we've done, which is typical of our approach anyway, for our students, we look at it as in like almost like 2 acts. Like Act 1 is before spring break, and Act 2 is after. A lot of times we like to let the content get informed by where folks' interests and backgrounds and other things go. So we've tried to leave things open-ended enough that we can pull in the topics that we've covered or explored before, but really based upon what our students are interested in. So for example, one of our modules is around, games or video games in education. Another one is just around maker and maker education. Another one is around like computer science or ethical ethics and at the intersection of ethics and computer science. So we don't know yet which week or weeks that those topics might fall into. But we've set our structure up that we can actually fold those in without it interrupting too much. So I'm going to stop talking about this. I really, my intent was not to be comprehensive and have like, here's the how-to guide to design a course, but rather to be able to take a step back and think about like all of those considerations that that go into designing or needing to make these kind of adjustments, and trying to almost regain a sense of control of over the things that can be done without necessarily bucking up against some of the more rigid constraints that are in place. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to a combination of formats. I haven't fully decided yet. I know I'm going to do another webinar on making whiteboard videos, another one on doing some of the facilitation techniques that I've got going on here, and other ones to kind of engage participants who are joining across distance using an interactive space like this, like a Padlet, like a mural during a live session. Kind of the fifth webinar topic at some point, just around kind of feedback, reflection, and assessment. And my hope is that at the end of this, whatever this takes, 3-4 weeks, there's enough kind of seeded or rooted here that people can get into and actually still use, even if they're already mid-flight in their winter or spring term courses, can start to incorporate any of these practices to just be able to facilitate better classes. So one question is, what about designing for both face-to-face and online? So some folks are going to be having this situation, this challenge where you're going to be having students in person and then also teaching across distance. So actually, this is something that a lot of K-12 institutions are facing. So I think a lot gets dictated by the type of content and experience you're trying to facilitate. So for example, if it's a one direction, like a mini lesson type of thing, I would suggest that, whatever, if you're used to writing on a whiteboard or a chalkboard or a marker board or flip chart, that you do find a digital medium. It doesn't have to be explain everything, but something that allows you to ink digitally, because you can, one, share that screen both to whatever's projected in the room for the students who are in person, but then also shared via your video conference to those who are joining remotely. And that way, the kind of fidelity of the visuals, which is so important when you're also navigating all of those other challenges, that's what I recommend. Sometimes this means joining from two devices within for the instructor, and one of them, only one of them should be kind of transmitting audio, and then the other is kind of joined to the meeting from both devices, and that's a way. It all depends on like what your tech department also is able to afford you. For example, I do think proximity to the microphone is important when you're thinking about the experience of those who are joining from distance. And then of course, I'd also suggest that if there's people who are joining from distance and it's going to be just a kind of a longer lesson or even a lecture, to think about recording it while you're doing it, but again, trying to have good audio in that. And then while students can tune in live, you can make the expectation that they watch the recording. I think for interactive, right, again, so much depends on what's the number of the students and what's the goal that you're trying to achieve. I do think you can find ways that if your web conference tool supports breakout rooms, to absolutely use those. And what you structure is you can start with the mini lesson that's in this way, right? So presenting to the class, also presenting to those joining at distance. And then if you're doing anything in small group, however you can socially distanced and safe, break the in-person folks into small groups and then break the online folks into small groups. So you can mediate things that way. a lot, and this will be one of the topics that I'll talk about later around here, um, is what kind of tasks can you do, and like what's the legwork and prep work you can set up so that when it's time, when you're actually in the facilitation mode, you're all ready to go to kind of send the in-person students and the online students to whatever that destination they need to be in order to collaborate or complete the tasks effectively. It's so hard to do that on the fly, right? For when you're in that mixed environment. I think we're all used to teaching situations in person, and it's very easy to like read the room and improvise and like move these groups here and um, do all of those things. When you're teaching, especially for that, it's like an impossible environment to do fully effectively, in my opinion, right? Some in person and some online. Um, my belief is that the greater effort that's put into the prep of the spaces and thinking about how to um, not necessarily have the same exact instructional design for those who are in person that are online, but still working to those goals. That's kind of how you approach it. Everything then though just takes time, and I don't know if there's enough time to do all of those things perfectly well. So I hope that answered the question in some way, as far as kind of a mindset in many ways of how to approach such a situation. Oh, there's another question. When I'm using my whiteboard, as I am here, and I have a new element, where is it that you're keeping? Okay, so I'm going to show a little bit of Wizard of Oz stuff here. So I'm going to change my settings to mirror. So before I was sharing in a particular mode that was like second screen. This is in Explain Everything. And it hid all of the toolbars and kind of letterboxed in like a 16:9 frame for all of you. And I was able to actually have things off screen. So right now I've got these guides showing here. So you could see this very thin border. So on those other slides, I had stuff that was above that line that you couldn't see. So for example, I didn't even pull in this graphic here. I was going to show like the breakdown of assignments from the class, but I just never even bothered to use it. So it's essentially having stuff like off stage and then ready to build in. Now the audience trick here, and you could do this in person too, if I was like airplaying or sharing with the HDMI cable. The trick is I'm going to go back to settings and I'm going to go to second screen. And so now here's that clean view. And I'm going to pull in that assignments graphic. Here it comes. Oops, it went behind another graphic. So that's how I was doing that little bit of a trick. So I pre-staged some of the objects that I want to bring in and then just pull them off here. Now, if I was teaching people how to use the tool, then my toolbars would be visible and I wouldn't be able to kind of pull off those tricks, or maybe it's effective. So I hope that answered your question about the way that I was bringing stuff in from off screen without needing to pull it up. I can, import anything at any time. Like here, you see me like browsing and finding things, and here's some pictures. Here's a picture I didn't use. So this is like just a little bit few more steps. But what I could have done again is had it off in the margin, and if I was thinking about like, oh, now's the time I want to show that picture of students visiting this cool portal space, here's that picture. And now I'm going to move it off screen again. And then that's that kind of visual effect. I'll show one more thing here. So if any of you are not using Explain Everything already, we've generously given this like big discount on the subscription price for people who are in higher ed, or if you want to share it with folks for individuals, please go ahead. There's no secrecy in this. We just want to help people as much as possible. So if there's like an individual here or there who using a tool like this in an instructional setting across distance find it helpful, then please do share with them.